Welcome to another episode.
Exciting episode.
Exciting episode of Celebrating Small Family Businesses. Yes. And in this episode, we're going to not be interviewing a guest. We're going to be talking about ourselves and our own history a little bit. And in the politeness, we're going to start with the ladies first. So
Hi.
We're going to talk about Connie's history.
Right.
So Connie,
Yes.
Tell me about your history of your, the origin story of your family business.
Well, actually, there's two family businesses, John. And both of them are farms in Central Ohio. One of them was created around the turn of the last century.
Okay, which side of the business? Side of the family?
That would be my father's side,
okay.
As far as I know. I don't know beyond that history. I'm sure, being America, we're all have agriculture in our roots.
Okay.
And then on my mother's side, I'm going to go ahead and say I'm the 10th generation that has had an association with that farm.
Okay.
And it was given to my grandmother as a wedding present. And so she and my grandfather moved there when they were first married in probably the 1920s, because my mother was born in 1933, so they would not have been married very long before they had her. And it's grain farms, all of them in Central Ohio usually are, corn, soybeans, and wheat.
Okay.
And then they rotated those in and out. And you always had cows and hogs and chickens and things like that.
Thank you. I was going to ask about.
Yeah, absolutely. You always had that as part of mostly for the family.
It was more for food and whatever for the family resources rather than commercial production.
Correct. That was other cousins. Other cousins had dairy farms and things like that. So there was a lot of bartering around that. If you had a big crop of, let's say, something in the garden, your tomatoes went crazy that year. And you could go and barter it for a couple of gallons of milk, hopefully.
Awesome. So that would be one aspect of the I guess the family business economy or culture in the community.
Sure.
Would be that ability to barter with family members and potentially a little bit higher level of trust.
Right.
Because they're codependent on one another through good and bad times.
Well, and my parents didn't even leave the county until after they graduated from high school.
Wow.
They were that, they didn't have the resources, and I'm not even sure the curiosity at some point because, everybody was kind of landlocked in that area. And so they didn't, there wasn't a lot of going out to the big cities, so to speak, and going out to restaurants. I can remember my mother saying, she was in her teens before she ever saw a restaurant.
Wow.
Yeah. So that kind of shows the isolation in some respects. But I also, inside of probably a 10-mile radius, there was extended family all around. So you always had, I can remember one time my great-grandfather flipped a tractor and somebody figured out, they drove by, got everybody in there, they flipped the tractor back over, got him to the hospital, what he needed to do, and he was back on the tractor like a week later. So.
And that somebody was likely a relative.
It was a relative. It was actually one of his cousins.
Okay.
Who, because there again, everybody was driving between the farms to check on them. And because everybody kind of had 100-acre lots or plots, so to speak. And my great aunt and uncle lived right across the street. You could see, half a mile, if that. You've been up there. But they kind of looked after each other. There was a more sense of community, I think, than anything else.
And I'll say probably there wasn't. Of course, they didn't have the level of medical care that we have today.
No, yeah.
But
the hospital was.
I think you've said that the hospital was very small and
very
limited resources in itself.
Correct.
So people had to look out for one another in that sense.
Well, and I was the first on both sides, both sides of my parents, that was born in a hospital.
Wow.
The first time. And I was the first one that was born out of the United States in probably at least 100, 150, 200 years.
Okay. So explain that for our listeners.
Okay. I was born in Japan. My father was military. And he left the family farm for the first time ever and went into the Navy and married my mother on the way out of town before he got shipped out. And so he went on and had never been on an airplane before. Had never been on a bus before. Had never been on a ship before.
Wow.
So he went to California for his basic training. So what an eye-opening experience for him.
Yeah.
And then what to do, and then to go to a foreign country.
Yeah. And so in your lifetime, thinking about the just how society has changed and how the technology has modernized things. I mean, I know you've talked about your very early days. There was not indoor plumbing in either one of the farmhouses,
right.
Your grandparents' houses,
right?
And that was later added, and of course now we've got
right. And the farmhouse that we bought, that my parents right after my brother was born. No, I can remember sitting in a tub on the back porch taking a bath.
And that was part of the rural. The more people for example, in Dayton probably did have indoor plumbing.
Oh yeah, everybody did. And in the town,
yeah.
they had it on both towns. But out in the rural country, no.
They didn't have the infrastructure.
It was all well water. You had septic tanks, and there was no trash pickup. I can remember my grandmother burning everything.
Yes.
Including tin cans.
I've known people that still do that.
Exactly. But yeah, so it was kind of that, and on both sides, it was very, very hands-on, huge gardens, and they grew everything.
Thinking about the family business then versus family businesses today, seems like one of the things to kind of celebrate is that sense of community, that codependent. I don't like the word codependency.
It really isn't.
The depending on one another and the support, the community support within the family, that of sharing of resources and knowledge. And,
right.
And, you were all very much connected. Whereas we've become such a mobile society today that people in an extended family, instead of living within a 5-mile radius, they may be scattered across the entire country.
Correct. And I can even remember, speaking of that, even the community phone lines.
Oh, the party lines.
Party lines, yes. And everybody had their own ring.
Party lines.
And they had their own ring. But that didn't make any difference, because I could remember my grandmother slipping in that chair. She knew how to put her hand over that microphone and listen in. And she could remember, she knew who was, and there again, small community. Like going to church in the next little town. And if you weren't there on Sunday, there was a call that was going out.
It was a phone tree.
Oh yeah, you were, are you okay? What's going on?
So it was, again,
very community.
We'll get into the family business stuff, but it was both checking on it was like a safety check. If you went in church, there might be something wrong. You might be hurt. But there was also a little bit of reinforcement of, you needed to be there,
right?
And we're letting you know we know you weren't,
right. Well, and I think with the family business, getting back to that point, negotiations. It was a constant negotiation, not only with, the people that you were doing business with outside, selling your grain to and things like that, trying to get the best prices. You were also negotiating with other farmers. I need you to have this part. I need your combine on this date, can you bring it over and we can work together?
Okay, pooling
because
of
everybody
machine
pulled, everybody pulled it because you couldn't afford your own equipment, especially with, you're talking
everybody couldn't afford
their own combine
for 100 acres.
Exactly.
When one combine is capable of doing
Multiple, exactly, or more. So what you did, it wasn't a rental type of thing, but it was more of a barter or more of an awareness that we could help each other.
Okay. Or did they have shared ownership? Might several members of the family
They might have
co-own what piece of equipment?
Well, they did later on in my world. I knew about that.
Okay.
But it was just a cooperative situation. And of course, with my grandfather working, for my grandmother to a point, he had to be quite aware because he also had his family up the road that he was also helping, farm. So that was a whole nother thing that was going on, that he had to balance her side and her needs in that farm, and his family, his parents were getting older and balancing that and working with that too, and working with his siblings.
Something probably a lot of people, family businesses, members, owners could relate to today.
Absolutely.
Because, if you're in a family business, you've lived that being my wife and being a daughter-in-law in our business, in our family business, in our family. Your family had needs, but you lived with my family, so
right.
There's always that dynamic.
Right, exactly. You always have to. It's a balancing act constantly.
So I hope that this has been an interesting insight. I think we could go on and on. But
there's lots.
We'll return to this for many times. So we look forward to sharing about my family business in another episode, and then some of the challenges that we've seen and overcome. So thank you very much for listening, and we will see you in another episode.
Thanks.